Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Ghost Education 101. Hey, Philip, how are you doing today?
I'm great, and I'm so excited about this interview. It's going to be amazing.
Exactly. I know, of course, like we talked about 2 weeks ago when we were live, I'm actually kind of fangirling over this one.
I thought you might be since you are the writer in the family.
Exactly.
And
I mean,
now my background finally fits the topic for tonight.
Right. I wish I was in front of my background, but I still have too much crap over in my kitchen area that I can't get to it. So I'll deal with my paranormal bookshelf behind me.
That's good.
But so tonight, holy cow, I can't even say enough about this. Just a quick bio. For those of you who weren't here 2 weeks ago and listening in, we actually have Dacre Stoker. He is the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker, and international best-selling co-author of Dracula the Undead. I have my copy here.
Oh, that's such a cool cover.
I've had this since it came out. Absolutely love it to death. And he's also done a ton of research, as well as a bunch of other books. I know we'll get into this, but I want to hear from him about what got him interested in researching his family legacy.
Yes,
that's kind of more what I'm intrigued about.
I've got a few questions ready. You know, those rabbit holes I like to jump down into. If he says something and I want to go in that direction, we might have to go.
Yep, exactly. And I'm sure, in every show we go down those rabbit holes. So I probably should bring him in before we go down one. And he's sitting in the background waiting for us to introduce him to everybody. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, Heather. Hi, Philip. Nice to be on Ghost Education with you guys tonight.
Yeah,
so excited.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us tonight and looking forward to it. And I know a lot of Tiffany, I talked to her on another show about tonight, and she's actually excited for tonight. So along with everyone else that's watching. And of course, before we get into Philip's long list of questions, the first question that I want to know is, when did you discover you had a famous relative, and what keeps you going and motivates you to research all this research, the Stokerverse, essentially, and all of that stuff?
So, I kind of joke and I say, I was born a little child in Montreal, Canada, in the delivery room. The doctor was there with a crucifix when I came out. Not another Stoker, what the hell? But, in reality, Canadian family, Montreal, me and my sister, pretty humble, because this was a couple of generations back now. This was, I was born in 1958. Bram was born in 1847. He died in 1912. So the link is Bram Stoker's youngest brother, George. So George is my great-grandfather. So Bram was one of 7 kids. What's interesting about a big Irish family, which is not that unusual, was that only 3 of those 7 had any offspring that survived.
Wow. That's interesting.
Right. And now only 2 have offspring that are still alive, that the branches of the tree are still alive. And so when you kind of look back at families with famous relatives, you sort of, especially in showbiz or literature, it's like, oh, everyone's clamoring for attention. Everybody's trying to get a piece of the pie. Well, first of all, Dracula went in public domain in 1962. The money that Bram Stoker made during his lifetime was not significant for the book, and he died before it actually went on stage or on screen. His widow did make a little bit of money in the last 12 years of her life from the stage rights and the screen rights. So that's framing my answer, and I'll get to that answer because I found all that stuff out when my wife, who is a Southerner, again, from Montreal, Canada. How did we get together? I came down here because the parents were looking for a retirement home. And so I married a local, dragged her to Canada, and within 2 years, we're back here because she didn't like the weather too much. Well, love the country, but now can we make it warmer?
Yeah,
so we're back in North Carolina.
Cold, yeah.
Very allergic. I mean, long underwear, Philip, in August, and I knew there was going to be a problem. But nonetheless, one of the things, and I'm not sure if this is true, you guys can fact check me on this, a lot of Southerners really interested in family genealogy.
Yes.
And was that way. And it just seemed that, of the one other family other than Bram, whose 2 great-grandsons are still alive, we're the only other one out there that was like, well, I want to find out more about George Stoker. And how did the youngest brother did? And what about the other kids? Because we sort of knew, even as a child, we knew of Bram because Halloween rolls around and people come to your house. Oh, the Stokers, what are you going to do? Give us candy or take our blood? Or, that'd be a cute joke. And finally, at the age of 12, I finally said, Dad, what the heck is going on? What are they talking about? And he said, well done, it's time to find out. And he took me to our family library, downstairs somewhere. And this is where he pulled out the first edition of Dracula that was signed by Bram to his mom. And then his mother passed it on to one of Bram's other brothers who moved to British Columbia. And it stayed in the family, and everyone who's had that book has signed it. And it's made my day. And then now it's in my possession, safekeeping, and I'll pass it on to my son, and hopefully he'll have it filed on.
Wow.
He then said, this is the book. And he said, it's a big deal. Many movies and everything else. So, not too many years later, I'm at boarding school, and they showed the movie, The Fearless Vampire Hunters. And it was a bit of a spoof. But it was, Roman Polanski, so it was, fairly serious guy, but a bit of a spoof. And then at the end, it was, based on the story Dracula by Bram Stoker. And it was like, oh, wow, this really is a bit of a big deal. And so it's gone on, but, that's when did I first understand it? But getting to Heather's second part of your question is about 15 years ago, with my dad had passed away, his other brother passed away. The final member of the family of that generation, who was the keeper of the papers. Isn't that, it's very Irish, Irish Canadian. Uncle Paddy had trunks of stuff, and he kept letters. And since he was the last one, he had all kinds of things from the other siblings of Bram. So he knew we were interested. And so he gave us a call and was really sad. He said, I've been diagnosed with congestive heart failure. I don't have that long to live. And by golly, my 3 kids are aware of all this stuff, but they're not as interested as you and Jenny. Would you come up here to Montreal and check out all this stuff? So I loaded up my laptop, my scanner. We flew up to Vermont, rented a car, drove to Montreal, and spent the next 3 days going through it was almost like a museum where the archivist is showing us stuff. And we saw, certificates that Bram won for different things at university. His other brothers won. We saw letters from famous writers like Hall Caine, Walt Whitman, these things that were still in the family, signed books by Mark Twain. It was incredible. Yeah. And
like
so
the historical jackpot.
It really was.
In your family.
The problem was, like, how do I, scan all this stuff? And he had the sense of leaving this stuff in my care as a custodian. And now all the books that have been left to me, and his family is cool with it. It's on long-term loan to the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia, so others can enjoy it. And it's beautiful. Also where that museum had purchased the Bram Stoker notes, which we'll get to later in this discussion. They had purchased them years ago. So it's kind of like bringing all this Stoker material back together. So not just self and my wife can do the research, others who are into it as well can do the same. So that started everything, just interesting family and get a balance of the different members of the family. And then, of course, the writing of the first book with Ian Holt, that really got me going, because you have to get really serious about research if you're going to write a book. And it goes from there, traveling to many different countries to look at libraries, university libraries, and private archives as well.
I mean, even as a little kid, before you even realized who you were related to, were you a fan of vampires and Dracula? Because I remember as a kid, I begged my mother to get me a Dracula cape. All I wanted to do was run around in a Dracula cape. So she finally had the neighbor make me one. I don't think I took it off till it fell apart. So,
well, I wish I could keep that myth going. But no, I don't think any of us in the family made an effort to dress up as Dracula because, you know, we didn't want to be cliche. So we're just kind of a little bit aware of, oh yeah, there's the Stoker kid again. There's the fangs, you know. So, you know, I had a pumpkin on my head one year with a cape, you know, or a hockey player with all kind of stitches, you know, and everything.
Yeah.
So, no, it wasn't that big a deal. And I kind of remember why, Philip, is my dad, you know, had a wonderful way about him. He was a very successful stockbroker, and he was an official of the Canadian equestrian team. And it was like, you need to make a name for yourself. You need to be a producer rather than a taker.
Yes.
And you know, I would say that probably is true with a lot of people who are relatives of famous people. It's like, yeah, it might get you a free drink or a free cup of coffee, or might open a door, but it gets tiring after a while. Somebody's always playing that card. It doesn't.
Yeah.
So you do have to get out there, and almost to the point where it's a blessing and a bit of a curse. Because, and here's that example. Heather held up the first book, and the second one even more so, Dracula with J.D. Barker, the prequel to Dracula. The publisher said, "Hey, that tweaked my interest. That got the email answered. But by golly, that manuscript had better be good, because we know that the reviewers and the critics are out there to roast anybody trying to ride the coattails of a famous relative." And I'm sure that's the same in entertainment. Yeah, there's a soft spot for some of them, but when you're trying to sell a book and do have some original thoughts, you've got to deviate a little bit from just, oh, let's talk about Bram Stoker, to what did I learn about Bram that I can put into stories that's different and new, that can complement his life and get people to understand him, but just not be the same old rehashing the same old crap that the regular biographers do.
Question?
Yeah, one quick question, because before we dive deep into other things and all things Dracula, is one thing I read in the notes that you sent me ahead of time was that Bram Stoker actually wrote more books than just Dracula. Was it he had 12 books?
Yeah, I mean that's the funny thing is, you think he's a one-hit wonder, but you know, number one, the first book he wrote was a legal manual, you can believe, in Ireland, that was still in use up until the 1960s. So he had a very legal side of him, because he was the clerk in the Petty Sessions Legal Department, then the inspector of all the clerks in Ireland. So the guy, anywhere he went, in sports, at university, philosophical society, historical society, he was a leader amongst his peers, but he also made a difference about things that he saw needed help. Right? So that's that very detail-oriented side of his brain, right? That's engaged, and that's doing stuff. But he had a very creative side of his brain. And sometimes, you know, as you sort of look at folks and you know, you're a people person, you know, you've got some people that are very detailed, some creative, and maybe more so. I think Bram was about 50-50. And I noticed that creative side of him when I discovered his journal. I saw poetry. I saw romance. I saw little bits and pieces of thoughts that, as a student in university, while he was also a clerk in the legal system, he was writing down ideas, Heather, to go into these other stories that he was writing. So I saw kernels and origin thoughts that he'd get in looking at everyday life in Ireland. And of course, in the court system, you see some of the lowlifes, obviously coming in and doing horrible things. So you get a real, an idea of the not so good side of life. He also loved the theater. He loved the fantasy world. He was also a founding member of the Dublin Painting and Sketching Club.
Wow.
So he had an artist side of him that looks at life through a different lens than the legal side. So when he gets into writing, it's, you know, he did a couple of books before he left to London, but in London, when he was working for Henry Irving as a theater manager, that's in his free time, he lets the creative side of Bram Stoker come out. You know, he manages the theater and makes sure all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted and everybody gets paid right. But he himself producing creative material, to me, that's his real comfort. And that's where he produced 12 other books. You know, I don't know. I mean, I think I've counted up to like 20 some odd short stories and lots of articles in newspapers about a wide variety of things. And it wasn't all just dark, macabre, you know, horrifying stuff. There was mystery, there was adventure, Egyptology, supernatural stuff as well. So pretty diverse guy. It just happened that Dracula struck a nerve at right place, right time, and has just stayed with the world in an incredible way.
Right. And in any of your notes, real quick, did you discover why he wrote Dracula? What inspired him for that?
Like,
and then this will probably go into Philip's other questions.
Well, I laugh because it's like I've worked hard to narrow that answer down to an hour and a half lectures that I give, and I'll try, Heather, because I mean I giggle, but it's like there were things in his life that were horrifying, and we can get to that. But things like his childhood illness and his stories his mother told him, Irish folklore being told to him, that was pretty horrifying. Cautionary tales. I've just had their own versions of vampires, guys. Banshees, polkas, changelings, all these supernatural type things. So events in his life emerged, and I call that indirect inspiration, right? People in his life. Sir Henry Irving playing the role of Mephistopheles, the devil on stage. A little less indirect, maybe more direct. But then he was also the kind of guy, that legal side of his mind, that does a ton of research. And I had said I wasn't the only guy to discover this, but I was brought in to help the discovery. And that is Philip Spedding in the London Library discovered all the books that Bram used for his research. Now, how did he do that in a nutshell? Bram kept in his notes that live in the Rosenbach Muse in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a list of his resources, just like a student writing a master's thesis. He listed his sources. So that book published by two very dear friends of mine who are no longer living, scholars, pinnacle scholars in the world of Dracula, Dr. Miller and Robert A. Sang. They published his notes in a facsimile edition along with their transcription. Philip Spedding in the London Library was a big fan. He purchased a book of that. And he knew that Bram Stoker had been a member of his library. But because of bombings in World War II, the old records building where they had the list of who took out what book, and they didn't have in those days what we remember, which is open up a library book in the back and you got that little sleeve with the card in it. And I remember people look at us like we're like dinosaurs to remember that. But even that didn't exist. What simply existed was you take a couple of books off the shelves, you go see a lady at the front desk. It's Mr. Stoker. I'd like to take these out, please. And here they are. What date? You won't be taking those home, will you? Yeah, you can take two of them, but you got to rules and all that. So he was very interested in those books. So he started wandering through the shelves of the London Library with his cart, and he found, oh, there's one of the books. There's another book, another one. And he had like 26 of them, brought them back to his office. And as he started to leaf through them, he found little check marks and little notes. NB, nota bene, check, underline, very small marks in pencil. Nonetheless, he was defacing the library book, but it turned out, as Philip cross-referenced, something to do with a volcano or a vampire or trance walking or ghost or symbolism. All these things that pop up in Dracula made their way from those books into his notes and then into Dracula. So he was like convinced, I've hit pay dirt here. I think I've actually now got proof. So he contacted me and Robert Basang. He's in Vancouver. I'm in South Carolina. We're working on an annotated edition of Dracula that came out on the 125th anniversary of Dracula. And we were doing annotations. We found all kinds of other cool things. He said, guys, let's do a Zoom. I need your help to verify if any of these markings, we can prove that Bram wrote them. And it just happened that Bram's great-grandson, one of the two, had loaned me for my research for this book that I was working on with the saying, a first edition of Dracula, but fourth printing of the edition that Bram's publisher gave to him. It looked just like this one over my shoulder, yellow with the red writing. But it was the 1900 edition. And Bram was told to take out 30,000 words to make the first paperback edition, abridged, which came out in 1901. So what you see in this book that was in Bram's great-grandson's house, now in my house, all these underlinings, crossing out, NB, nota bene, exactly the same type of markings, check marks, with a very similar type pencil. You know, we magnified it and we sort of compared them, sent them to a pencil expert. Oh yes, that's a whatever, you know, HB, this. So we helped verify that the London Library, in fact, does have those books. Robert and I, within a week, we had flown over there and started to analyze all those books, and we're taking pictures of every page that had a mark on it, so we ourselves could see what got Bram's attention. And let me just say this as I then take a breath, and you guys can think about it. This time period that these people wrote these books, and it was heightening Bram's awareness, was, and I would say, one of the first times of Victorian era paranormal exploration that you guys know all too well. This was the time that people were thinking about spiritualism, mesmerism, all these different fringe science, because religion was losing its grip on the power of society as to the unequivocal gatekeeper of life and death. Now people were more interested, as science was becoming to enter into this. All in these books, science is beginning to question things. What about life after death? What about spirits? Can we connect with them? Hence, tarot card readings, seance, spirit rapping. All that is going on. And Bram Stoker is in the middle of it. And he is very interested in it. So digest that for a moment and hit me with some more questions. But, you know, this is Paranormal Investigation 101.
Yes.
Perfect for this podcast. Because he was, again, slap dab in the middle of it and a very interested and willing participant.
So he was Irish, and when you think of Irish, you think of Irish Catholics at that time. What religion was he raised? Do you have any idea?
He was raised Protestant.
Protestant.
So okay. That was a little bit of a friction.
Yeah.
I think that it didn't affect his writing, because you see a lot of the Catholic sort of markers and things, you know, the different symbols, the wafer, the holy water, the crucifix in the novel. So it wasn't like Bram was like Protestant versus Catholic. I'm not going to talk. We can't be friends. He was more worldly, but definitely aware of it, Philip. Definitely aware. He was, you know, he was a religious man, married in a church. You know, everybody had to choose their sides in those days. Yeah. And that was his place.
Do you know if he ever went to any spiritualist churches or seances? Is there anything written about that?
Oh boy. Now here's where, and now this is where speculation has to come in. And I got to tell you, I'll try to tell you where I'm putting bits and pieces of circumstantial evidence together, or being outright and just speculated. Because what drives me crazy is some of the biographies that are out there that write, and Heather probably, being an author, knows this too. It's like you can get into this and just say, oh yeah, Bram Stoker did this and he was aware of this. We don't know everything he did or what he was aware of. We don't exactly know what inspired him. We can put things together, but I think it's irresponsible for a biographer to go out on those limbs unless they preface this by saying, I'll be making some some
Assumptions.
assumptions along the way for the sake of entertainment. But
Yeah.
be careful when you call that a biography. But anyway, so I didn't find these. Again, I don't find all this stuff. There's lots of other people who are very serious researchers, university students, other scholars who are doing master's and PhD. But the nice thing is, because my wife and I run the Bram Stoker Estate website, we help our cousins manage the estate. So we become a clearinghouse for anybody that says, look what I've discovered. Are you interested? Would you like to try to give me credit, but publicize this?
Yeah.
So a university student, oh my gosh, I can't remember, Midwest somewhere, US, had discovered in a library in England, Leeds, over 30 or 40, I think, letters between Bram Stoker and people who were sort of known to be experts or authorities or interested or the subject matter about the occult. So you guys know, and I'm sure your listeners do, the occult is not just a bunch of devil worshippers or cutting the throats of black cats on Friday the 13th and sipping blood. It's much more than that. It's looking into spiritualism and other things, and as you say, different churches and so on and so forth. But it's also witchcraft, religion, and magic. It's all thrown in together. So, was a Freemason, Philip. That is got a little side of it that's very spiritual. People have said, oh, he was a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn. There's no proof of that. It's, again, speculation. But I do know that he was very good friends and mostly a mentor to a young lady who was an orphan and homeless, brought under his wing at the Lyceum Theater and helped her become a set designer and became a very famous artist of the Smith-Waite tarot cards. Pamela Coleman Smith, who was a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn. And I've seen interesting books about her. She's done sketches about Bram. She calls it Brammy, Uncle Bram, Uncle Batty. She's got a great sense of humor.
That's great.
But, Bram helped her and recognized a soul that had substance and needed some direction. But poor thing needed a job. So, yeah, they had all kinds of jobs like that. So, Philip, I don't have absolute specifics, but I do have a great feeling that between these letters in the Leeds Library, Bram sort of notes an interest in things spiritual. Very good friends, Arthur Conan Doyle, Mark Twain, famous people who were, spiritualists and had experiences and writings and all that in this area. I just think that Bram wasn't so outwardly about it or demonstrating his interest in the occult because he was an upstanding conservative theater manager who was fighting for his theater and his people to get a fair shake and to elevate the role of actors and actresses and stagehands in society. So if he was to be seen relevating the dark side, that could kind of come back to hurt him because people in those days were resistant to go to the theater because they felt it was a place of debauchery and drunkenness. A lot of the actors were drunk and so on and so forth. But Bram and Irving were on a mission to change that, and change that they did to the point where during Bram's 27 years there, it became the place for royals to go, all different classes to go. And Henry Irving became the first actor ever knighted by the Queen for his contributions to the theater.
Well, that's amazing.
I think that sort of sums it up, fairly long-winded though. But what Bram did with it to end with, he inserted all these little things into his stories. The supernatural in Dracula, Mystery of the Sea, the Jewel of Seven Stars, Snake's Pass. It's all there. You just have to know where to look for it. You just don't see him standing in a soapbox at Hyde Park, going on about it.
Do you have any idea if he knew Harry Price in England? Is there any mention at all? He's our, the godfather of paranormal investigating, which
Right.
is the same time period, early 1900s. So I was
Okay,
wondering.
so Bram died in 1912. Was Price around before that?
Oh yeah, he was around before that.
Okay,
I
so
can't remember the exact date.
I don't know. That's my way of saying it doesn't jump to. Yeah, it doesn't jump to my mind. But he did come to America 8 times, right? So Bram did have exposure to that sort of spiritualist movement from upstate New York that sort of filtered its way down, because they were in New York, they were in I think Syracuse, so they traveled with the theater all over the country and met all kinds of interesting people. So it stands to reason, knowing that's his sort of an ilk, that he might have met folks, but I just haven't seen.
It's not in writing. Okay.
I haven't seen anything to that effect in writing. I've seen things about ghosts and interest in ghosts.
It was just on the down low from his business life to
right.
his.
He has to be a little bit careful about his personal side versus the business side.
A lot of people are, today we're like that. We have to be careful with who knows what we do because of business. So it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. You just got to protect.
Is there a Stoker home place, as we say in the South, that you can go visit to see where he grew up or lived, or is there anything like that?
Well, sort of. There's the place that he was born and raised for the first 2.5 years of his life in Clontarf, just outside of Dublin, does have one of these plaques on the outside.
Oh, okay.
But it's a private home. You can't go in and check out stuff. I have been working, of the 15 years I've been at this, more than half of them have been trying to encourage Dubliners and Irish in general to recognize one of their more famous literary sons, Bram Stoker, even though horror is not a genre that they place as high on their literary pedestal as poetry and drama and prose. So there is a Bram Stoker festival that runs, it's been going 12 years now, over the week of Halloween. And he has a small place in the National Museum of Literature, MOLI, they call it. There was a Dublin Writers' Museum where there was a room with Bram Stoker's stuff in it. And the Pearse Street Libraries of Dublin, the City Council owned, the public libraries have some very cool holdings of Bram, some of which have been donated. But there's not one place you could go and go, okay, let's all knock it off and to this one place and go see the Bram Stoker exhibit in this place, or go see this.
Yeah.
That's one of my dreams. The big dream to start with was to get a bronze bust of Bram Stoker in Ireland, and an artist by the name of Brian Moore, who's out in California now. We did a GoFundMe together. We raised the money, and he donated this bronze bust of Bram Stoker to the Dublin Writers' Museum. Unfortunately, it has been closed since COVID, and they're looking to relocate their holdings. A second bust was made and donated to the Museum of Popular Culture in Seattle. It was actually in the museum that Paul Allen is one of he's passed away. He's also the guy that purchased the Bram Stoker Dracula manuscript. So so we wanted it to go to a place where there's already significant holdings. So there are a few of those little places, Philip. Yeah. The Rosenbach Museum is another to go see his handwritten notes, some of the other books that my family has put on loan there. So they're spread all over the place. I've done cool things by trying to have some of the documents reproduced so people can see them and purchase them as a keepsake. But I'm almost like the traveling exhibit right now that goes around and talks about it and shows slides. One day I hope we'll be able to have sort of a permanent home for more things that can tell all of Bram's life, not just his Dracula life, other stuff too.
Now, I know that there were stories of vampires and lore and things before Dracula, but did he invent the name Dracula? I don't know if I've ever heard if he came up with that name.
I'm going to answer that, but I got to tell you one thing. If I don't, I'm going to feel really stupid.
Okay.
Just a few years ago in your hometown of Atlanta.
I didn't do it.
Well, you're going to want to do it.
Okay.
Emory University's Rose Museum.
Yes, been there.
Purchased from a friend of mine, John Moore, and it's not private. He's happy to let us know they purchased the biggest collection in the world of Bram Stoker books, letters, memorabilia. They purchased that through somebody, I believe, in the Rose family, and it is available to the public, members of the library, right in your hometown, 2.5 hours down the road from me.
Down the road. Oh my gosh. Okay, I know what I'm doing next weekend.
You got to go check it out. There's some very cool things. So that's the other place that I'm hopeful that maybe that becomes a bigger repository, especially since I'm in the South. So back to the name. In those notes that I just mentioned that live in Philadelphia, you actually see sort of continuum, 125 pages over 7 years of different names that Bram was assigning to his supernatural count. Okay. And it started as vampire, Wampyre, and the W as a V is from Styria, which is a province of Austria. That's how a vampire would be referred to. So that was the first name he had in his notes. He was, and I'll tell you why. Another famous vampire story, which predated Dracula, came from Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, Carmilla. Carmilla was set mostly in Austria. Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu was also an editor of the local newspaper, the Dublin Evening Times. Bram Stoker approached the newspaper to have him write pro bono theatrical reviews for the newspaper because Bram was upset they didn't have any reviews. How can people understand what plays are all about, and how can the people running the plays know if it's any good or not based on what the public think? I think Bram was very familiar with Carmilla and Mr. Le Fanu and loved the idea, since Le Fanu had paved the way for a vampire story in Austria, who already had existing mythology of belief in the vampire. So start setting Dracula there. And then he went to Whitby. Whitby in England on the Yorkshire coast had a library. That library had a number of books, but one of them he called up. I believe he called it up because about 2 months earlier, I found evidence of him having a dinner party. And I found the seating arrangement card where Arminius Vanbury, professor from Budapest University, was traveling with the Secretary of Prime Minister, Mr. Grusha. They were dignitaries and were entertained at the Beefsteak Room in the back of the Lyceum Theater by Bram Stoker, Henry Irving, and some others. And I think that's where Bram got the hint. Go check out Vlad Dracula. When you read the novel in 2 locations on 1 page, Van Helsing says to the band of heroes, my friend Arminius of Budapest University tells me who he must have been. And Philip, he goes into the history of Vlad the Impaler that he got out of a book in the London Library and Whitby Library, same book, 2 places, William Wilkinson, the account of Wallachia and Moldavia, the account of principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia. And it has the sentence in it. It has more than just a sentence, but the sentence says Dracula in the Wallachian language means devil. It was given to somebody who displayed cruel action or cunning. If you take those words that I just said and you do a word search in Dracula, you'll find 4 occasions where they pop up. It's when Van Helsing is explaining the cunning and cruel Dracula, the devil. So here's back to our whole idea of the occult. Bram was looking for the devil incarnate. He was enamored with this whole idea of the devil worship. The devil is this, leader of the dark world.
Mm-hmm.
He's well defined, obviously, in religion and very well defined in occult. And where is his home? In hell, the bottom of the pit of earth, in the bottom of volcanoes. So that's where the name comes from. Not necessarily Vlad the Impaler.
Mm-hmm.
That actually comes later when he read another book by a guy called James Samuelson in the London Library. And again, thank you to Philip Spedding, who found that book that had a whole page and a half on who Vlad Dracula was, known as the Impaler, had such a reputation for atrocities towards his own people and his enemies that he got the nickname the Devil. 2 different books mentioning Dracula as the devil, giving us the backstory. Why? So Bram Stoker can make his story seem real. That this devil incarnate is not just a fictional character that's talked about in dark rooms with candles and stars and stuff. It's a real guy that is coming to London, England, and that's what made the story so bloody scary, because it was potentially real.
Talk about rabbit holes. It's amazing.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, Heather, you have some questions?
Yeah, let me pull up my screen. I kind of lost track when we got talking, and we've covered some of the stuff that I've already had questions on. And hold on, my son's getting water next to me, so it might sound like water's running. But when it comes, I want to dive into a little bit of your writing. So what actually inspired you to write Dracula the Undead, which I thought was fantastic. I love the correlation and the referring back to the original book and all of that. That it was just amazing how it flowed. And it felt like that book should have, but it felt like it was written by Bram himself, the way it flowed through. So what gave you the idea for that one and then the prequel that you wrote?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the compliments. And a lot of credit has to go to Ian Holt and our historic researcher, Alexander Gallant. You get a team of guys together, and they had done a screenplay some years ago. It never went anywhere. Here's the skill testing question for you. I'm not sure you might get it from your listeners. What film do you think inspired these 2 guys to do a continuation, sequel, you may call it, in a screenplay that then didn't work? But what film do you think it just plugs into nicely with?
The one that comes to the mind is the one with Gary Oldman.
Bingo. The 1992 Francis Ford Coppola, Gary Oldman. They love that film. And this is what they told me when they approached me. How does the film end? How does Dracula supposedly get destroyed?
Right.
Any of you guys know?
He doesn't.
Do you remember the scene? Okay, I'm going to give you a hint. Okay, so the band of heroes is chasing the gypsies who are protecting the coffin or crate on the liter wagon up in the mountains to get really close to trying to get into Dracula's castle, which is up on top of a volcanic mountain. Night is falling. The sun is going down. So it's very tense. The good guys, the bad guys, are they going to get up there where the Count will have his old powers back? Parker and Quincy Morris, the American, manage to fight off as the others are got their Winchesters and holding the gypsies off. They fight. They get onto the crate. They whip open the top. This is the novel now, right? And they thrust a knife into Count Dracula's chest. He gets a look of peace on his face, and he crumbles into dust and disappears. That movie did a similar thing, but the Count and his carriage in the final fight was inside the castle, and Mina actually, to put him out of his misery and everything else, she stabbed him with a knife. Now, that's not how the lore, not only in regular vampire lore, works, or the lore that Bram did his research, and it was a Scottish lady, Emily Gerard, said, the way you kill a vampire is a wooden stake into the heart, decapitate the head totally, and put garlic in. That's what they did to Lucy when the band of heroes realized she was transformed. They get into her crypt and they did all that. The book and the movie did that, and most of the movies do that. But when Alex and Ian saw that, they go, this is, they're all screwing it up. He's not really dead. There's just a knife. How can he die? He didn't really die. So good writers and screenwriters always look for an angle, right? There was no wooden stake. So when they approached me and said, look, our screenplay hasn't gone anywhere. Let's turn it into a novel. Let's have a member of the Stoker family involved, preferably somebody that knows a lot about Bram Stoker himself. And let's have him as a character. We didn't have him in the movie, but let's adapt the screenplay. So we basically disassembled the whole screenplay, threw some elements out, put some elements back in, grabbed things together. And I said, look, guys, I can't write my way of a paper bag, but give me a year. I'm going to do some more research. I will provide you some writing, some dialogue, some character analysis, characterization of Bram Stoker, of the son that was born at the end of the novel. So let me come up with some stuff. But I was also still had a year to go in a teaching contract. I wanted to honor that. I wasn't ready to stop. They had other things going on. Said, great, get back to us. Let's work on this. And I'm also the kind of guy, as I said earlier in the show, I got to be a producer. I'm not just jumping into something, throw my name on a book, and making a few bucks. I have to represent the family here and do it right. So that ramped up, as I said earlier, Heather, that ramped up the research and finding out reading as much as I can. And that gave me some confidence. But I also was within a comfort zone to say, look, I'm not expected to write finished work. You can get editors, you can get an overall continuity editor, you get a finishing editor, which we had at our disposal. So I just had to tell a story, basically, and have it gel with their story.
Right.
So we did, and we had many different iterations. And then Ian's agent brought it to Dutton Publishing, and it was like, oh, thank God, they want it. And never forget the meeting, because we had a nice lunch. It was all about, I was like, oh, that's years. So they said, great, now we're going to assign you to a senior editor. Now the work really gets going. Roll up your sleeve, boys. Holy crap! I thought it's done, but that's okay, because Carrie Thornton basically did the same thing. Went through chapter by chapter and said, guys, this doesn't fit right here, and we got to tone this down and pop this up. So when rookie writers are doing stuff like this, and it's a good story, and you've got a decent name, the publishers, traditional publishers anyway, will assign people to it's their best interest to get this thing right.
Yeah.
So that was lesson number one, to create the sequel to Dracula, Dracula Undead. The story takes place 25 years after Dracula ends. The prequel is a different story altogether, because I learned a heck of a lot in that process. And even since then, I had discovered Bram's Lost Journal and transcribed that with Dr. Elizabeth Miller, who had also did the Dracula notes. I took that directly to a publisher who I had met in this process, did not have to go through an agent, and said, look, it's not a work of fiction. This is nonfiction, but it's significant. And Bite Back Publishing of the Robson Press in England did a phenomenal job publishing Bram's notes with our transcriptions, journal, excuse me. And it's now available in paperback on Amazon. But 2 books under my belt, I learned some lessons about how to do this. And I ended up going straight to a guy that I got to know, a member of the Horror Writers Association, J.D. Barker, who had written a really cool book called Forsaken, that had a character in it that was depicted in the very same way that I felt Bram Stoker's nanny should be depicted. So one of the things that has been a major horror in my life was you have children, you're working, I was teaching, my wife was helping run our retail store, I was doing double duty. We had to hire a nanny, take care of our 2 young kids when they weren't at school. I, being a bit of a control freak, I was worried. What happens if we don't get the right person? What happens if they have a dark side? And when I read JD's book, I was confirmed. Oh my God, these nannies can be really strange and weird and all the rest. But I knew in Bram Stoker's life, there was an orphan nanny that came into their life and helped Bram's mother. And at that point, she only had 3 children, but she ended up having 7. So Ellen Crone was a real person and was the mysterious link. Where'd she come from? She lived with the family all her life. She died. The family took care of her. Thornley Stoker, the oldest brother, had locks of her hair in an envelope that J.D. Barker and I found at Trinity College in all the papers and things that were collected, along with interesting notes back and forth. So there's some weird stuff going on. Weird enough. And Heather, I'm sure you're thinking, yeah, this is the kind of fodder that writers get to have fun with, right?
Exactly.
That JD was the right guy. I had the story outlined with all these weird oddities, but the whole idea of Bram Stoker was a sickly child for 7 years. He recovered miraculously. And after 7 years old, he was fine. No idea how that happened. And by the age of 17, he was a champion athlete stud at Trinity College in race walking, gymnastics, all-round athletics champion, rugby, rowing. How does a kid go from being an invalid to a star in 10 years? It's got to be something to do with the nanny. There's got to be something there, right? A little supernatural, because he was the guy that got into all this, right, Philip? He got all the occult. So where does he get this info? So that's the premise. And when I presented to JD, he was like, oh, man, I'm all over this. How do you want to do it? Well, the first thing is it's got to be epistolary. Because we didn't do that with Dracula. The undead took some heat, because that's the way Dracula was written, journals, diaries, different points of view. We had to do that. And that took more refinement. And luckily, JD had that. I had learned by that stage too. So my writing is 99% of research, outlining, providing text blocks, what I want the characters to say, specifically the ones that I know because they're my family and I've researched them for 10 years. Give them to a willing co-author with enough of a rein to say, look, you don't have to do everything as I say. You got to weave this together in a great, dramatically tension-filled story. Let's go. And that's what works great. I currently have 3 other novels, similar scenarios, 3 other different co-authors, and I'm sort of, the ship's captain with the stories, moving them along. But because of the talent of these other guys, and gal in one case, we're making great progress.
And based off of the prequel that you wrote, did I read correctly in your notes that it was a top 5 finalist by the Horror Writers Association for the Bram Stoker Award?
I know. I can't believe we didn't win it. He's like, come on, it's about Bram Stoker. We didn't win. We were top 5 finalists, but it was won by Paul Trombley. The cabin in the woods. That one that went on to. So it's like, okay, good company right there. And Josh Mallerman. Yeah, okay, good company there too. That's the Bird Box guy. So that was nice. It was optioned by Paramount. The option was renewed for 4 years. And finally, they didn't do anything with it. So JD and I and our agent said, come on, guys, look, this needs to be turned into a series. Either do something with it or just release these guys so we can go off and do something with it.
Right.
The checks were nice for 3.5 years, but we now have more traction of getting this turned into I think a streaming series is where it's going to end up. Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Looking forward to that, definitely.
Yes. I've got a question about earlier you said it's now public domain. How does so no one owns the Bram Stoker brand, so to speak, or
No,
Dracula?
that's a great question. The brand is one thing. The
Mhm.
actual rights to the novel
Okay.
go public domain 50 years after an author dies. So
50?
Dracula, 50,
Okay.
50. Dracula can be published by anyone, anywhere, any cover, without paying the family any money after 1962.
That's crazy.
The film rights and the stage rights were sold by Bram's widow to different people, Universal for the 1931 film. So they have rights to it. I'm not sure, Philip, if those rights are still controlled by Universal or Sony or whoever owns it now, or if they've had to buy them. I do know this, and I'll tell you this, and I will try to keep it brief. Nosferatu, which is very, the most famous original horror film, silent, was an unauthorized adaptation of Dracula. They even flaunted it in the opening credits. Bram's widow, with the help of the Independent Society of Authors, brought suit against them. It lasted 2.5 years, and she prevailed. When Prana Films was read the judgment by the German courts, and was ordered to pay restitution to Mrs. Stoker, they claimed bankruptcy, so no money. The German courts said, well, fine, you're going to need to destroy all copies of the film. Well, that did not get done, and it was impossible to get it done. I did a ton of research into this because copies of the film were distributed to a number of different countries for previews and for other festivals and so on. So the Independent Society of Authors, when they found out that they just spent a lot of money on a German lawyer for 2.5 years and did not get a penny back into their coffers for defending the wife of one of their deceased members, they were going to have to go and open up more lawsuits on 4 or 5 different fronts to get the films destroyed. So they said, forget it. We've done what we can. And Mrs. Stoker wasn't obviously happy. But to this day, the film lives on, and it keeps getting remastered in certain ways. They get films, music scores to them. And I believe I'm correct. I never get all these names right, but is it Robert Eggers is coming up with a brand new version very soon of Nosferatu, I believe, with one of the Skarsgårds as Orlok. So I think we're in for a treat because in a perfect world, as far as the Stokers are concerned, even to this day, and his great-grandsons feel the same way, Florence Stoker prevailed. It was the first copyright infringement of book to film. You think of it, films were just being invented. She set legal precedent. But the film wasn't destroyed, and we enjoy it to this day as a really bloody, spooky, horrifying German expressionist movie. So there we go.
Was Bram's father or parents, did they have money in those times? Were they considered wealthy?
No, they were considered sort of middle class, working class people. Bram's father was a legal, not a legal secretary. He was a secretary in the legal system of Dublin Castle, which was the British seat of power in Ireland. So he had a good job. They raised 7 kids, but Mrs. Stoker was really the driving force to, we're going to all get better, in our place in life by education. 3 brothers became doctors, 1 civil servant. Bram, they wanted to become a civil servant, but he rejected that and went on to be theater and writing. And the 2 sisters, quite successful artists.
Very nice. So Bram didn't set out to be a writer. The theater was his main objective?
Yeah, he reluctantly became the clerk at Petty Sessions Legal Department because his dad had just retired.
Okay.
So he was the breadwinner for a while, which was kind of like his duty to the family.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it just about drove him nuts. Very boring, mundane stuff.
Yeah.
What kept him going was the theatrical reviews in the newspaper, giving him access to the theater and being able to sort of adjudicate and everything, and loving the theater and that sort of side of expressionism and his writing. So he got the job to go to London to be the theater manager for Henry Irving, who was fairly well known at the time. But the two of them, and I believe, Philip, this was a little bit like Bram Stoker's life mission was to prove his father wrong.
Yeah.
When Bram ditched the job that his father got him at Dublin Castle, his dad wrote him a letter. The theater is not an honorable place. It's not a place for good people. It's no place for you. Basically, stick your nose to the grindstone for the next 50 years and have this good job. And Bram connected with Irving. They changed the way the stage worked. They made sure everyone was using right costumes. They were not drunk. They were some lines well rehearsed. And as I said, first actor overnighted, the theater was the place to be. Bram was successful in that way. So that was his outward sort of contribution to life. Inward, it was his writing. And that was his deep passion.
Yeah.
And he only did it when he had some free time. He did his research in London Library. But I've now found Cruden Bay, Scotland, north of Aberdeen, is Bram's chosen writer's retreat. Small fishing village. Yeah. It still is. It's a place where he stayed in 2 or 3 different houses, as well as the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel over the years with his wife and with his son and his dog. But that's where he wrote Dracula, Mystery of the Sea, The Water's Mouth, Lair of the White Worm. And there is a castle there. The castle is called Slains. Any of you listeners want an interesting treat, Google Slains, Slains Castle, Cruden Bay. It's now a ruin, and you can look at it by drone footage. You will see the internal layout of Slains Castle is the same way Bram described the internal layout of Castle Dracula in chapter 2, when John Harker arrives and gets led in the door through a hall, through another door, into an octagonal room with no windows to the outside, and then sent to his room. What does that tell me? We know damn well that Bram Stoker was invited to visit the Earl of Errol. It was not a ruin when Bram was there in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It was a beautiful castle. But because, as many of these big earldoms go, because the price of farm produce, wheat and oats, the bottom fell out when gas prices and transportation around the world changed. Everybody wasn't just having to buy Scottish and English wheat and oats.
Yeah.
They could get it from anywhere. So the bottom fell out. All these earls lost everything. And in the case of this place, we'll tell you a short one. I was giving a lecture in Cruden Bay to the town folks who were interested. A friend of mine, Mike Shepard, who we wrote a book together about Bram Stoker's time in Cruden Bay. The hall at the Kilmarnock Arms Hotel was packed. That had audiovisual up there, had the picture of the octagonal room, just like I said to you. And a guy at the back stood up. That was my family's castle. I won't try to do the Scottish accent. You could hear a pin drop, and Mike Shepard and I like, holy shit, what did we say wrong?
Yeah.
And he said, if you look a little farther in the book, you'll see Bram Stoker mentioned that Harker says the octagonal room was lit by a single lamp. I have that lamp.
Oh my God.
I recovered it from my family when we stripped out everything, and he mentioned the date, the 60s. They took out the upholstery, the paneling, anything of value. That light hanging down is in my flat in Chelsea. He sent us a photograph of that lamp. And Mike and I ended up going to, oh God, I can't remember which one. Mike found it. One of the archives at either Edinburgh or Glasgow University found picture of the octagonal room in its heyday with that same lamp hanging down.
Oh, yes. That's so cool.
I love stuff like it. It made me shiver thinking that, and here, unplanned, and here it was. So that's where his writing was done. Holidays, that was his escape from, just, sort of everyday life, and just allowing himself to do something for his own self rather than bolster Henry Irving and all the other actors and actresses at the Lyceum Theater.
How old was he when he wrote Dracula?
In his late 40s. Yeah,
late 40s. Okay.
Now, I got to tell you a paranormal thing, though, because this is very cool.
Please.
And if I don't get this in, I'll kill myself. So there was a book in his personal library called Second Sight in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland by a guy called McCrae, Scottish guy. John Browning is a professor at SCAD in Atlanta, highly rated scholar, Dracula scholar, found that Bram wrote a book review of that book all about second sight, premonitions, in a newspaper in New Zealand. He sent me that book report, that review. So it's the only review that John's found that Bram Stoker did of any book, and yet he chose to do it on something paranormal like premonitions, and what they used the term in those days, second sight. I dug farther. I found a newspaper in Dundee, Scotland, not far from Aberdeen, that Bram was there visiting when he and Irving were there with the Lyceum Theatre doing plays. And a writer said, I went to this gathering, social gathering, to meet Henry Irving, but I found Mr. Stoker so much more interesting because he regaled the group by the fireplace as he smoked his cigar and drank his sherry about his experiences with second sight. And none of those experiences, guys, were from the book. These were things that he experienced himself. And one of them was with the Earl of Errol from Slains Castle. So he was invited on one of his holidays to go on a shooting party, shooting pheasant. And each guest is given a loader to load the shotguns for you, right? So they're out doing this, and the loader is your typical Highland Scot called a ghillie. And the ghillie and Bram struck up, obviously, conversations throughout the day of trying to shoot the pheasants. And Bram said, as he mentioned in this room, and the journalist wrote this down, it's in the newspaper article, how's the Earl doing? How's his health? And the ghillie said, oh, he's not well. The sheet is high. Have either of you ever heard that expression?
Never.
Sheet is high. So think this, when is a sheet being pulled over a body?
Oh, okay.
So the sheet being high means he's near death. And Bram says, but he's vigorous, he's so healthy, he's eating, he's drinking, it's, I just bear my words. So nothing happens. Bram comes back the next year, summer holiday, invited to go on the same type of pheasant shoot. He requests the same ghillie as he had a nice day with him before. And he's telling all this to Mr. Scrivenger, the writer, and he says, how's the Earl? I guess you're wrong. He looks fine to me. Your sheet's not so high, is it? Oh, the sheet is higher still. Just mark my words. And so he's like, well, has there been any diagnosis? None whatsoever. Just trust me. 2 weeks later, the Earl died of an unexpected brain aneurysm.
Wow.
So these are the type of things that put hairs in the back of your neck. This is where Bram Stoker was actually experiencing some degree of second sight or premonition. And if any of you listeners want to read up on this, here's a freebie. Bramstoker.org is a free website where all of Bram's public domain works are listed and you can read them for free. There is a short story called The Seer, somebody with second sight. Go read it. If you're into the paranormal and all this cool occult stuff, Bram, I'm convinced, met a lady called Gormala or some name like that, because he often changed names a little bit.
Love that name.
Yes. And he writes about her in this short story that then becomes the opening chapter for what I think is Bram's second best book, The Mystery of the Sea, which takes place in Cruden Bay, Scotland, and is supernatural, and it's got second sight, all that cool stuff.
Good stuff. Just a quick question. Were his parents alive to see his success as a writer?
Not his dad, but his mother did. And it's funny you asked about those rare papers I did. My cousins actually loaned me an image of 2 handwritten letters from his mother, Bram's mother, Charlotte Stoker, congratulating him on the success of Dracula. I love it. It's going to make you famous. It will put you up with Shelley and others, Mary Shelley. So yes, that is, I'm glad you asked that, because even if in Bram's life, again, his book was written in 1897, he died in 1912, didn't go on stage till 1924, didn't get movies till 31, which greatly helped all the book sales. It wasn't a smash hit until long after he was dead. But his mom recognized it and sent him a nice letter.
Oh, that's beautiful.
2 letters. Yeah, it is.
Cool. Well, we only have 15 minutes left before you need to go. So the one question that I want to end with is, what is the most interesting or surprising thing you've learned about Bram?
That I haven't already mentioned.
Right.
Because
Something
I think
new.
that, well, the second sight thing is really cool.
Yeah.
That and the whole idea of all these letters in the Leeds library about the occult. He also wrote a book called Famous Imposters, where a whole chapter, and again, bramstoker.org, all this stuff is free. Check out Famous Imposters. There's a chapter on mesmerism.
Ooh.
So this was a side of Bram that falls right in line with your purview, you guys. The occult, paranormal, it just was called something different back in those days. So that's up there, Heather. What else? Well, I mean, I'm a sportsman myself. My thing in life as a trained PE and science teacher, I coached all kinds of sports all the way up to the Olympic level for Canada and modern pentathlon. I have seen people recover with the use of performance-enhancing drugs. I've seen all kinds of weird stuff go on. I was at the Olympics in '96, Philip, as a spectator, and seeing a lot of my old friends and people that I coached. But how Bram recovered from being such an invalid, confined to his room, mostly his bed, he says, never knew what it was like to stand upright for 7 years.
Wow.
And then through whatever, I think circumstantial, that he was afflicted by very serious respiratory allergies and asthma. And why do I think that? Because it's still prevalent in the family to this day.
Oh, interesting.
And I have checked with different doctors who specialize sort of in forensic Victorian medicine and ailments, and all the things that they had ran through the gamut of. Could Bram have had meningitis? What could he have had that made him essentially a cripple and had to recover? None of them kind of come up.
Yeah.
Like this just couldn't work. There wasn't the medicine to cure people from those things. But if it was the asthma and respiratory allergies, look what they slept on. Mattresses made out of straw or hay. Same thing with pillows covered with linen. Those allergens would have been right next to your face all the time. Right? You would have been breathing that stuff. No asthma puffers, none of that stuff.
Nothing.
Where they lived in Clontarf was on Dublin Bay. Musty, mildewy, wet climate. All this mildew all the time. They moved about 2.5 miles inshore away from there. And that's when he started getting better.
Interesting.
That's when he started doing his long distance walking, just to get the hell out of the house and, stop the boredom. He got better, and he then built up his strength by walking, and then he became a champion race walker at university. So I think without the medicine, I think the only thing that was provided to him was pretty gruesome: bloodletting.
Oh boy.
And why? More circumstantial, but I found a treatise written by his uncle Edward Alexander Stoker, all about treating fever. Back in those days, fever was basically anything that made you sick. It wasn't just the high temp. But if Bram had these respiratory allergies and asthma, he would have been feverish, and they would have come in and do just what this treatise by his uncle said. You either cut them and take out blood, or leach them and take out blood. And how much? Until they pass out. Until they pass out.
So scientific,
but that's the day. That's what they thought. And then what did they do? They'd give you a mixture of oil and red wine. So to cleanse, and to kill with the alcohol. So if you had enough blood taken out to pass out, and now you're rehydrated after being severely dehydrated with oil and alcohol, you're going to be in some stupor for a couple of days off in some sort of macabre la-la land. So I'm putting a lot of little circumstantial pieces together, Heather, but that's what amazes me, is how does a kid recover from that? And basically, what does that do to develop a very dark sense of imagination and not make it turn into a wacko?
Sure.
Plus, when you combine the stories of banshees and goblins and pukas and Irish vampires, while you're a young kid being entertained and educated, along with one other brutal story that I have proof that he was read, and that is the account that his mother went through in 1832, where she survived the very contagious cholera epidemic at the age of 14. And in this story that she told Bram, and then years later, he requested his mother type it up and send it to him, he used that story for the basis of a horrifying series of children's stories in the first book that he wrote, that was a fictional book called Under the Sunset.
Wow.
And in the story his mom wrote, gather this, she witnessed people being misdiagnosed of the cholera and buried prematurely and crawling out of the grave and live a full life. So that being told to a kid who's being bloodlet and being drunken and everything else, it is horrifying. So that's what I found, Heather, and I've got time for a couple other questions, but I think that's the most amazing thing, is what was that guy made out of? Directly or indirectly, these influences that we've talked about for an hour and 20 minutes, and I appreciate your indulgence. I love it. It's stuff.
And Tiffany did have a quick question. Autocorrect got the best of her. She corrected herself in another line, but she wanted to know, if you could talk to Bram today, what is one question you would ask?
That would be it, Tiffany. Great question. What made you sick? How did you get recovered? That's two questions. That's part A and B. I want to know if my theory stands up to anything. That would be it. Yeah, because I think I couldn't ask him one question about why'd you write Dracula or what inspired you, but I really want to know about that illness. It's such a personal thing. It must be an amazing story.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think he's ever visited you?
You know, I felt a presence, and I'm just, it's hard to tell, as we all.
Yeah.
In the spiritualist world, you can't always tell. You don't get very overt signs because we don't know how sensitive we are, right? But when I really get into this, and I might be sitting at the Rosenbach Museum or in Seattle, Washington, looking at the typescript, or when I was looking over the actual journal, original things that Bram wrote or had his hands on. When I was in the library, the attic of my cousins in the Isle of Wight and finding the journal. And I'm reading these things. I have felt that it's like someone's got to tell my story.
Yeah.
I need someone to do it. I want someone to do it. And it's wishful thinking that I'm driven by my own wants, or maybe it is the genetic want, or maybe it's the spiritual want. I don't know what it is, but I just feel that it's there. And there is that interesting presence sometimes, especially when I go to, I haven't mentioned this yet, Marsh's Library in London, in Dublin, where I know, and they know, the books he looked at there, just like Philip Spedding in the London Library. They know the desk that he worked at.
Oh, yeah.
They know it, and I sat there and I kind of like taken a pause and just kind of take some deep breaths. I think I've been, somewhat affected by his spirit. Yes, Philip.
I bet if you talk to him on a regular basis, you may be surprised. And you ask him to give you signs and pay attention.
Well, I'll do that, in respect to you, but thank you. I will. I will. I think that's probably the next step for me.
Just a question I want to get to before we have to let you go. Do any modern day people in the Vampire Society ever contact you? Because there are people out there who say they're vampires and they
practice
have rituals and practice.
Yeah. No, you're right. I pride myself on being open-minded. I go to New Orleans. I've been to places in California where I've met people who do voluntarily practice sharing of blood with others. I get an open-mindedness and want to be inquisitive as to why and what, so on. Very respectful, because that's people's wishes, and look, everybody, it's their own thing. But yes, I have met folks and they say, "Hey, that's pretty cool. I'm glad you're interested. You're not some snobby guy who's like, Dracula is like out of our league. Oh, you're like a normal guy." And it's like, yeah, I am. And I'm not sure if this novel has stimulated anything to help you in life, or you've decided this because of Anne Rice's novel or somebody else that, whatever, because there's a lot of different offshoots. Stephen King, Anne Rice, Chelsea Quinn Yarborough, Charlene Harris. There's so many great writers that have picked up the mantle in the horror world and in the vampire world that have taken the idea that, Bram didn't even start it. It was Le Fanu and J. Malcolm Reimer and John Polidori that started it. Bram just packaged it in a way that it was believable and awful long lasting. And other people have been inspired by it and sort of gone in different directions. I mean, so much so that, it's more than a cottage industry. It's a world genre, isn't it? Horrors and vampires. So it's pretty cool that Bram's one of those pillars, and I'm pretty proud of it.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Heather, do you have something? Because I could keep going, but I know.
All of my questions have been answered, and the audience has been quiet today.
Well, let me end with this. Things that are coming up to go check out. First of all, check out the Stoker verse. It is something that I've created with my good friend Chris McCauley, an Irishman living in Canada, in between Calgary and Edmonton. We are taking other things from Bram's world, and integrating those things that he left out of Dracula, things that didn't make it in. There's editor out. We've got an RPG game going. We've got a card game coming out from Iconic. We've got a handheld video game, Dracula's Dark Reign.
Oh, fun.
We got a board game with miniatures from Crooked Dice, audio stories. So our website is actually, we've just hired a company to redo the Stokerverse website. So if you go to the website now, you won't see much. Go to bramstokerestate.com. That's where my books are for sale, but also lots of information that I've talked about tonight about Bram and the other members of the family. Dacrestoker.com has got information about the tours that I run with experience-transylvania.com. I take people to Transylvania to see places associated with both Vlad Dracula as well as Bram's Count Dracula. We are incidentally going to be in Bran Castle during a tour October 28th, celebrating our own Halloween a couple of days early. I'm going to head to Derby, England, just in a few weeks to the 100th anniversary of the first showing of Dracula on stage in Derby, England in 1924. And I go to Whitby, where Bram did a lot of his writing of his notes there, not the book, but writing the notes for May 26th, World Dracula Day, celebrating with some of my friends. So a lot going on. You can follow me on Facebook, Dacre Stoker Author, Instagram, Dacre Stoker Author as well. And I thank you guys for, being interested, and also, maybe going out of your lane a little bit, connecting Bram Stoker in the horror world to your paranormal world. It's obvious, I think, by all of our conversation that there's a lot of crossover and a lot of common ground. Yeah.
Yes.
Again, thank you for your interest in having me on the show.
Thank you for coming. Yes, this has been so much fun.
I know, and I have a lot more information because I've done presentations at conventions on could Dracula be real? And I go into Carmilla and all the different stories and all the actual theories behind vampirism. And so I got a lot of great information about this to add to that now.
Well, I tell you, someday we got to, all three of us need to stay connected, because it might be very cool if you and I get to a convention together somewhere.
Yeah.
And double team this concept, right? I do great. I do co-authoring of all my books. So that might be fun. And Philip, we got to talk more about getting you over on one of our tours, and maybe also helping me learn to maybe be a little more aware and connect with Bram or other members of the family too. So you guys have a lot to offer me as well. So I think some reciprocation is in order.
If you're ever in Atlanta, coming to Atlanta, let me know. I'd love to meet you somewhere. And
usually it's just to the airport.
I'm sorry.
No. I know it sucks, but I come to Dragon Con occasionally or some other convention. So it'd be fun. I'd love to sit down and have a coffee or drink with you and compare notes.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And I'll make sure I stay in touch, because I'm going to have a lot more questions, because I do have other projects that I can't really talk about publicly yet, but you're going to be a great source of information for those projects.
Well, let's stay in touch with email. Let's have another show. But again, I really thank you for giving me this forum. You guys are great. Your show is wonderful.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I'll make sure I get all of your contact information and your websites up on our Facebook page as well, so people can reach out to you immediately.
Okay. I'm going to do
find what you have.
Hold on.
Okay.
I'm going to do a screenshot. So everybody wave to the camera. There we go. So I got all of us on the screen. So, if it's okay with you, I can post that saying what a great show I was on last night.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you so much. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Oh my goodness, that was so amazing.
And my mouse is totally stuck.
Did you break your computer?
Are we on? Are we still live?
We're still live. He's gone.
Okay. Because my mouse is just done. That's interesting. He's just frozen.
Yeah, it's Bram. He doesn't want you to continue.
It's so weird. I kept hearing "That's my boy" the whole time from some woman. That's why I was asking him. That's my boy, and I was thinking, who is that, and who are you? And why is my mouth stuck and not moving?
Yeah. And it's funny too, because I mean, the reason why I was so I lost Philip. Holy crap. So hello, everyone. If Philip comes back, we will continue talking for our last 30 minutes, but I hope you guys truly enjoyed that conversation that we had with him, and we will get him back on the show in the future. Great conversationalist. And I think I know I talked to him previously about it, but we might even do get him to do part of his presentation, kind of like we do when we do our presentations on Ghost Ed. So keep your fingers crossed that Philip comes back. If not, I'm going to just, here he is. Hold on one second.
Okay.
There you go.
I knew something weird was going on. Okay.
I'm like, all of a sudden you disappeared, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I was just talking and like, whoop.
Okay. But I was looking forward to this show mostly because growing up, Bram Stoker was one of the few authors in history that actually inspired me to be an author.
No, that's so cool.
Yes. So it was a combination of him and crap, I'm drawing a blank on but it was an old school author that we read in school growing up. And then, of course, my neighbor was editor for the local newspaper and kind of shoved me.
Cool.
But yeah, he was always something I loved. But yeah.
The question I wanted to ask him was if you came across a first edition printing of Dracula, Bram Stoker, what price would you be looking at?
Oh, yeah.
Any idea? Anybody can look that up for us real fast? What the price of a first printing edition of Bram Stoker's Dracula would cost?
Let alone a first printed edition with all the signatures of the family through all the generations.
Oh my gosh, I hope that's in a safe. I hope you have.
I mean, when he was talking about it, I'm like,
how falling open.
I'm like, what could I sell to purchase that? I'm like, I don't have enough stuff to sell to purchase
it. Your retinas, a liver, something.
Right.
So, all right, here's a question. Out of these two, which was your favorite Dracula, Christopher Lee or Frank Langella? Mm-hmm. Which is your favorite?
For me?
Yeah, Christopher Lee was the early, and Frank was in I think the 80s.
I'd have to say, if Gary Oldman's not on that list.
Yeah, no, because that creeped me out. That just was too creepy.
I'd have to say Christopher Lee.
Yeah. Frank was the sexy one. Christopher Lee was the scary one, but yeah. Yep. What was another question I was going to ask him?
But I do know I'll send him a message and we'll get him back on later this year because I know we do have I'm trying to do like kind of Halloween-y type shows for Halloween for the month of October, but I do know I'm going to have to reschedule Blake Blessed, even if we kind of record him on a different day that we're off, because I've been asked to teach a class that night.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like so bummed because he's so fun to interview, and with all of his horror movie experience. But I might try to get Dacre back in October.
That would be great
for Halloween.
Because he has that collection Unearthed that I saw in another video interview with him, and it's a collection of things I guess you can purchase, and it's some copies of documents, a copy of the original copyright form for Dracula, I think the U.S. copyright. There's a lot of cool documents and things that that come in this kit that I believe you can buy. It looked really fun. But we didn't even get to that. There's so much.
No, I know.
But I really wanted to get, something, to find out about him as a person, like his family. Like it sounded like, he went off to England and college and Scotland, and it sounded like some money people to me. So it was good to get a little bit of background.
Right. Yep.
So, he answered my question about religion when he said his mother wrote him to congratulate him on Dracula. So apparently she didn't have any issues with, because sometimes, depending on how deep their religion is rooted, it's like those things are no-nos. So,
yeah. And being that his dad was opposed to it even just as a writer back then, it almost makes you wonder if the dad was very strict in his religious beliefs.
And also in South Carolina, I want to know if any of his neighbors are afraid of his house or anything. Like mine are because of the doll. You know, so.
That would be an interesting question. I'll have to.
It's like they just speed by his house on that dirt road. Yeah.
Yep.
He's a cool guy, but man, that tour, holy cow, in Transylvania and all those countries, I would love to do that. But I would really need a Dracula cape tour around through that castle, though. I mean, you would have to have that. It'd be a must.
Yep. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm definitely. I do want to get on one of his tours, and if not this year, I'm hoping next year.
Yeah, because that can't be inexpensive. That's a lot of traveling, and that's pretty far over there too. So.
Yeah, I want to do that, and then I also want to go to Ireland and rent a bicycle and just drive or ride the bike pub to pub, investigating each pub.
Girl, you can do the bike. I'm gonna be taking a cab. I'm too clumsy and not very graceful, so a bike and myself would not be the way to go.
Well, you'll get the cab and you'll be there before me to do the pre-investigation, and I'll just show up to do the investigation.
I'll be hauling the equipment. Yeah.
Right. Oh, the Ghost Education 101 on tour.
Oh, let's go. I always want to go to the Ram Inn in England. Oh man, that would be amazing. It's about to fall in though, I think. But
I know. I've heard stories about that.
It's like, why can't somebody? I know it's probably one of those grade listed buildings in England. You know, if it's a grade, you can't do much to it. But it seems like they ought to be able to somehow conserve it or something. But
restore it or something.
Yeah, but they're so picky about their buildings there. Like like the windows you can't change out. I know I watched this program about English bed and breakfast, and they're talking about how noisy because they're on the road. And they said, well, we can't double glaze the windows because this is a grade something listed building. So they are really strict on what, as they should be. But I don't know. I'd hate for that building to just crumble. If any of you don't know what I'm talking about, look, is it Rams Inn or Ramsgate Inn? I can't remember. Is it Rams?
I think it's Rams Inn.
Rams Inn in England. It's like one of the most haunted places on the planet.
Yeah. I mean, I know Ghost Adventures was there, and Zach was trying to get seduced by the incubus or succubus that was there, but nothing happened.
I hope it did. Yeah. Yeah, he's possessed by something, but anyway.
Yeah. And just to kind of go over a few of our upcoming presentations, we do have Steve Dills is coming back in 2 weeks. He has a presentation on high strangeness and preternatural phenomena, such as
say that one more time.
High strangeness and preternatural phenomenon, such as what's happening at Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh, that should be interesting.
So he came to me and said that he'd love to share that with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then on June 5th, this is one I'm looking forward to. Crime Scenes and the Paranormal. We have return guest Larry Lawson and Alan Slonaker and Ike Enzi returning to the show. And then Mark Nesbitt, the author, he runs the Ghost of Gettysburg tours, and he wrote the book Of Blood and Ghosts. He will be on the show as well.
Good night, Tiffany. Yeah, I know who that is.
So Mark was my encouragement to continue with the paranormal field when I started off, when I was only 19. So I met him when I was 19, so excited to talk to him. And every year we went to Gettysburg, I took all of his tours and talked to him every time we were there. And when I reached out to his wife and said, would he be available to be on the show? And she's like, of course, he'd love to.
Oh,
and
nice.
His co-author wants to be on the show, but she can't be there that night. So I do plan on having her in the future. And then the next one that I'm looking at, we have on June 19th, Kathy McDaniel will be talking about near-death experiences.
Oh, NDEs. Yeah, that's wild.
Yep. And then we have the Static Com. So Ron Iacovetti, if I'm pronouncing that right. And his gang will be doing a presentation and panel discussion on their new Static Com.
Have you heard it? Have you seen it before? Well, you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah, he was
fascinating.
on my other show a couple months ago, and he shared
Yeah.
some samples while we were live.
Yeah.
So that was kind of
What
pretty
they call something seance. What is he? What's his name for it?
Yeah,
Digital seance or something?
something
Can't
like
remember.
that. Yeah.
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 He's just a great guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Lourdes,
Yeah.
I
Lourdes, she's great.
I keep trying to get them engaged to get married. I've been working on that for years. It's like, dude, if you let a ghost hunting girlfriend go, you know.
And then to wrap up until for July, we have one more panel discussion with all of our law enforcement officers. Larry, Ike, and Alan will be returning. And then we will also have 3 psychics to be announced on the show. And it's going to be psychics and law enforcement.
Oh, see, I wish I had that ability to help find bodies and things. But, you know, I'm more media mystic than I am psychic. But gosh, that would be so great to help people find their missing loved one. But I mean, quite emotional. Oh, and the lineup for the radio show.
Yes.
We started May 6th with Bishop James Long. And that was part 1. They cut off the end of the. I'm trying to get the editing just right, where nothing's cut off at the beginning or the end. So it'll get better, people, if you're listening. But a client of mine listened to it and says, "Oh my gosh, she was just hooked and totally freaked out listening to that first episode." So that was good. So this Monday's part 2 of James Long, and then we have the John Zaffis interview, part 1, and then part 2. Then we have the Ouija board, talking board, Historical Society in 2 parts. And then Sean Whittington, Reverend Whittington, is in 2 parts. And then I think there's 2 parts to the rescue mediumship. So we go up to, those are our shows up until July 1st. So you guys can tune in.
Yep.
And I hope this new mic sounds better. Does it sound better? Can you tell?
I haven't noticed a difference.
Okay.
So hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'll be back where I'm supposed to be with my mic and my lights and everything.
Well, is anyone still on? They probably all left as soon as he took off.
We have 3 people left.
Any questions from anybody? If not, we'll just take off.
Yeah, nope, no questions. Oh, I mean, I don't know if she's still on or not, but at 9:02, our first question was, but it didn't have anything to do with the guest, so I didn't bring it up right away, was who made our intro?
Me. Jerry's in a hotel tonight. She's got a friend she's visiting.
Yep, Sandra says she's still here.
So if you want to go back on the and answer her about that video, either she hates it or she likes it. I don't know. Maybe I don't want her to know.
I don't know. I'll find the comment and answer it because I'm trying. It was on Facebook, so I need to. It's either I'll have to figure out if it's here or on Parallax.
Okay.
And we did have a comment earlier that I completely forgot to. It was just a comment, not a question. But the other Ibrahim was talking about, and this sounds interesting, a fantasy adventure horror fan film with the Arthurian wizard Merlin and Count Dracula as longtime rivals and arch enemies.
Whew. Well, that
sounds interesting.
Merlin, yeah. Huh.
Yeah, other than that, it's been quiet. I think they were just in shock that we got him on the show.
Merlin needs to have a daughter that Dracula's after. That would be good.
Ooh.
Write that down. I'm claiming that. Nobody can steal that from me unless they get me in on the money.
The other benefit from tonight's show is I've been talking with my publisher on this, and they sent me back rewrites before they would send me a contract for a book that I wrote. And I've been sitting on the rewrite since December. But talking to him tonight, it's like, now I'm going to get off my butt and get that done.
It's amazing how much input the publishing company has with, what do you say, the editor and the plot, and then and it's like they take your stuff and they just put it in a blender and mix it all up and come up with something new. It's fascinating.
Right. Yeah, it's fiction world is a completely, I mean, I've been trying to get into the fiction world forever. I mean, back in the day where we used to write letters to editors and, on a typewriter, click, click, click.
Please consider my book. Yeah.
Right. And nonfiction is so much easier to get into. And you write the book and they're like, okay, they don't even fact check it. They rely on you.
I watched a movie last night, How to Murder Your Husband. It's a true story about the Nancy Brophy story. I never heard about it, but she tried to be a writer and kept getting rejected, and it just kind of drove her nuts, and she killed her husband. Sybil Shepherd, and Steve Gutenberg. It was pretty good. Sybil.
That's where the real life is far more scarier than any fiction can be.
It was pretty fun. All right. Well, see everybody in 2 weeks, I suppose, or you can listen to our lovely voices on Monday nights at 9 on 99.1 FM on the internet.
Yep, I put the website up so they can find at least the website and contact information. And I think the website has where you can download the app. I downloaded it, but I haven't logged into it yet. So I gotta get
or
that
just
done.
Go to that WDJY website and just click listen live and whatever's playing. Yeah, that way you don't have to download anything. I hate downloading stuff all the time.
Yeah.
All right. Good night, Miss Jerry. Good night, Sandra. Good night, John Boy.
And I didn't even do our typical follow us on Facebook at Ghost Education 101. I'm like,
I don't know where to find us by now. We can't help you.
Right. And if they're watching, they obviously know how to find us.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
Oh, I didn't even update our banners for tonight. So stay tuned to our Facebook page for the websites on where you can find information about tonight's guest, as well as all of Bram Stoker's public domain works of writing, which I'm going and downloading every single thing he wrote. There's a couple I've heard of, some I haven't. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. And then we will be back in 2 weeks. So stay tuned for the announcement with the information on how to listen to that. So thank you, everyone. And we will see you guys in 2 weeks. Have a great night.
Get your garlic.